Dragons are a concept that has permeated all throughout human history. All across the planet, there are mentions and drawings of them, writings, statues, depictions in general. Yet, I don't know about you guys, but I've only ever seen one, and that is the Komodo dragon, and I was sorely disappointed. Although I guess bearded dragons aren't so bad. They're just really not dragons. So why is this the case with this mythical animal that has never been found? Well, typically it's because an artist told somebody about an animal and then they attempted to draw it, sort of like how cows and cats look really weird in medieval paintings. That being said, in today's episode, the dragons are very real. Being accidentally released, they would go on to flood the skies and burn the ground, leaving humanity in shambles, with billions subsequently either turned to ash by the dragons or turned to ash from our nuclear capabilities. So in today's episode, let's get to how humanity would actually completely wipe the floor with dragons in our modern tech era. I mean, it's like a boxing match between a gorilla and a toddler. Rep up for my boy Harambe. But you know, back in the day when men had spears and swords, sure, I could see it then, but not today with what we have. Anyways, we're gonna talk about the internal anatomy of these dragons and how they were seemingly able to overcome man. So let's get to dragging these wyverns, because they aren't actually dragons, they're wyverns. Dragons have 4 independent legs and a set of wings on their back, acting as a third pair of limbs. Wyverns have 2 hind legs and front limbs that are actually wings. That was bugging me the whole movie. Yeah, you didn't know that I had like the deep lore on dragons, did you? And I know you may be tempted to call them amphitheres because of their apparent lack of hind limbs, but the back limbs are there, they're just hard to see. Also to that one guy who stopped asking me like to cover this months ago after asking for months, see, I told you I'd get to it. And just as a heads up, I just got back from like a 16-hour drive from like Texas to Georgia, so I'm completely wiped out and I actually don't feel great, so hopefully I don't sound like crap in this video. But first, this episode is sponsored by Raycon. You know, after driving to Texas and coming back, I randomly contracted a cold, which is just currently awesome. So you know what I've been doing? Sitting in the tub with Raycons, attempting to enjoy my life while my body betrays me. But that's what I actually like about them. Their durability means they are sweat and water resistant, so I can actually be in like a steamy environment and not ruin them. Plus, with their 8 hours of playtime and 32 hours utilizing the charging case, I'm going to just continue to sit in there while my body deals with whatever this is. But also with their new custom gel tips, they keep a fantastic connection to your ear, keeping them in and not falling out. So going to buyraycon.com/Roanoke or clicking the link in the description, you can get 15% off your purchase today. But we all know that this will eventually end and I'll be functional once more. And once that point is reached, I'll be able to head back to the gym, which is perfect considering Raycon's noise isolating fit keeps out unwanted noises while I literally walk into the sauna and sweat. For some reason, there's like always a dude in there trying to talk to you and I have no idea why. So to avoid that, you can again go to buyraycon.com/Roanoke or click the link in my description to get 15% off your order today. All right, let's get back to it. So let's start off our story with my editor's neck of the woods, jolly old England. It's not looking so jolly over there, but hey, maybe that's just me. As a boy walks through a construction site, having used to work construction and almost had a 5-ton concrete bucket lowered onto me, this kid is violating a ton of regulations, and everyone there would probably be fired if England's version of OSHA saw a kid walking around without a hard hat, or really at all. This kind of activates my almonds, but Quinn is heading down to a dig site to show his mom that he lost his scholarship like a total nerd. As he gets down there, everyone appears to be somewhat wrapping up for the day. Quinn shows his mom a drawing of what he did, and apparently it's pretty bad. Quinn suggests maybe his dad should pull his weight and, you know, help pay for school, but apparently he's a deadbeat dad, soon to just be dead. As they talk, a man shows up saying that they've hit a void. So they do the smart thing and then hand a kid with no PPE a flashlight to go into an area where it hasn't been mapped at all. They didn't even know it was there, and they don't know if there's noxious fumes, which actually happens all the time. As Quinn enters, he can hear breathing in the background, and the walls are covered in a strange overlapping substance, almost like they're scales. Then as fire drips onto the ground behind him, he looks up and spots a wyvern, not a dragon, as it spits a substance in his face, momentarily blinding him and causing blood vessels to burst. He's lucky because the same substance used to, you know, set fire to everything. It's just been spit in his face. So he nopes out, yelling as most of us would, and then goes to his mom. So also, I just want to bring it to your attention, those 2 workers just let him go in there and then walked away. Very good. The mom rushes Quinn to go rinse out his eyes while the workers casually approach the wyvern hole. Doing the smart thing and not knowing what's in there, brainlet number 1 tries lighting up a cigarette to basically blow up the entire foundation of London for all he knows, but doesn't work as they all get flame broiled extra crispy. The mom says nope and then grabs Quinn and then heads to the elevator being chased by flames. So as they're going up, Mr. Wyvern comes up and says hey, and then just looks in the cage, crushing one side of it. He then flies off to wreak havoc on a species that would absolutely be fertilizing fields with dragon meat in a few days. But somehow it doesn't work. You'll see this, oh, we took out 1, but 100 more would take their place. Okay, so then take out 100 more. To quote a man who who knows what the ladies like. They're tough, but they ain't invincible. So Quinn looks over, and Mommy Dearest was actually crushed in that attack. That's kind of a bummer. And this starts DragonCon 2008. Truly a cursed year. We get the breakdown of what's been happening for the last 2 years, and it hasn't been good. Humanity was knocked back on its heels entirely. Started with really just one dragon, but then it turned into millions. Seems like something that could have been solved with a few Warthog A10s, but I digress. So humanity does what humanity always does and falls back when losing on the Scorched Earth policy by using nukes. Well, that created more ash, which is really what the wyverns feed on. So really, we just kind of ended up helping them. It also is hinted at that these things kind of wiped out the dinosaurs and then started the Ice Age as the wyverns descended back into Earth to let it replenish. So now they've come back, and then they talk about humanity surviving and outlasting the wyverns as they're starving. You know, really getting you in the mood for some classic human on wyvern violence. Moving underground, Quinn is getting ready for his Batman role. They are installing water systems to protect themselves against the flames produced by the dragons. A man approaches Quinn, telling him Eddie has completely lost it. This sends Quinn running outside to confront him. Eddie says basically, bro, we are starving. We need to harvest now because he's got kids to feed. Quinn tells him that if they do it now, they won't have any seeds to actually sow next year. So we hear about the other settlements that have already gone dark over the years, but luckily Leonidas is here to back up Quinn, but Eddie doesn't really care. Later that night, as they do a play over Star Wars for the kids, they ask him if he made it up, and he takes credit for it, of course. I mean, who's gonna check him on it? As they say their prayers, basically it's all about running from wyverns like total chads. But deeper in the castle, Eddie goes and gets his boys to exit the camp to go get food. The wind then picks up and wakes up Quinn as a random kid goes in there, freaking out about dragon's breath, though it's really just the wind. The next morning, well, it all looks like crap out there, but our heroic band of farmers heads out to the field. Looks like they just grew tomatoes and maybe some watermelons. What a diet! But because of their movements, this has rustled the jimmies of a nearby wyvern. As bird flies overhead, it freaks out and then nopes away, indicating that there is a wyvern in their mountains. So now it comes out to play, basically attacking the farm. It eats one guy and attacks the rest of the group, but luckily for them, well, sort of anyways, Batman and Leonidas show up to pull their asses out of the literal fire. So of course their junker won't start when it needs to, as the dragon then attacks by landing in front of them. They escape as the dragon then just eats the ash off the field. Quinn is now starting to see what Eddie was saying. They might not have a harvest next year. Well, yeah, I guess the farm is just completely burned down, so they're definitely not having a harvest next year. Well, later on, as the radio man listens in, he hears American. The patriotism rises. They show up in their tanks and trucks to ask for assistance from Quinn's camp. As Quinn goes down to meet their leader, Van Zandt, I have to say, Matthew McConaughey looks like Detective Baby Legs to me here. I have no idea why. I know they tried to make him look hardcore, it doesn't work with his face, I think. Anyways, his request is they need to restock their ammo as they just landed there. He then T-poses outside the front gate for a while to assert dominance. As Quinn tells him they could stay because they basically just said they would just overrun the place if they wouldn't help, that kind of just cements their introduction. Van Zandt then tells him that he's a dragon killer and hands him a tooth, but really, he's a wyvern killer. He got it out of Coffeyville, Kansas, after he and the townsfolk took it down in the golden hour, where the light wasn't so good, which apparently affects their vision. Because of this, Quinn says, sure bro, come in, like he even has a choice. As Leonidas scolds Quinn for letting him in, a helicopter flies overhead to prove that yeah, they actually do take out wyverns, and that this thing would have been destroyed a long time ago if they hadn't. So you're about to witness the most inefficient way you have ever seen taking down animals. And I don't know, the whole thing is just like bizarre. Like I get the necessity, right? But these guys are called archangels whose life expectancy when they exit the chopper is about 17 seconds. Well, that would indicate that a lot of dudes get got this way, right? Well, later Van Zandt gets angry about losing a few guys who were archangels. I mean, what do you expect? Anyways, you'll see. So later that night, as Quinn burns the meatloaf and he talks to a woman named Alex, he got some background that Quinn found a 3-year-old clinging to his mother after she was turned into pot roast, so that's basically his son now. He has regretted it ever since, you know, because kids and moodiness. Quinn then asks Alex what they're really doing there, but as she does, player Wyvern has entered the game. And again, you're about to see like a well-oiled machine with a bunch of sand in between the gears. The Americans now take off to go fight the dragon because hell yeah, brother. While 3 of the Americans go to put up pylons basically. This will triangulate everyone, including the Wyvern. And I know I just said dragon, it's tough not to. Wouldn't it make sense to actually already have these set up though? If you plan on being in an area for a while? I mean, who knows? Maybe a friggin' Wyvern will show up. So the Archangels realize they've got a Wyvern on their tail while they're up in the air. As Pylon Man number 3 goes to set up his stuff, he just gets completely got. So it's up to Quinn. He grabs a furry 4-wheeler and then heads up to the mountain and gets it set up, allowing for the chopper pilot to actually see, and whoops, the thing is right behind him. So the Archangels bounce out and then get the wings clogged up with nets, but it shakes it free. And then you have one man that just straight runs into the ground, ouchies, and another gets eaten. Van Zandt then tells Quinn about the plan of using the horse as bait and to ride straight towards him. As Quinn does, Van Zandt gets a shot off, hitting the thing in the chest and taking it out. And I mean, I gotta tell you, that didn't really look that hard to take out. It's just fast. Surely a 50 caliber round couldn't do anything against that, right? I mean, he just harpooned the freaking thing, but a 50 caliber round, nope, it's just not possible. So later that night, the castle broadcasts their position to any dragon in the area, or wyvern, and they basically just have a giant party because they took out a wyvern. So the Americans arrive to basically break up the party by saying, envy the country that has heroes, but he pities the country that needs them. He lost 3 people, which he brought wyverns in the sky. I get it's bad, but dangling with these things, that's gotta happen almost every single time at this point. And of course, I mean, that would be pretty disheartening. Anyways, so this goes over like a wet fart in church, and the party is now completely dissolved. All we were missing was the record scratch. So now Quinn and Zan have a proper domestic. Well, almost. He tells Quinn to follow him by saying, I lead, you follow, very caveman. And this is where Zan tells him everything. They're running out of people, out of ammo, and out of time. He says that they have brought down tons of wyverns, and they were all female. So there is one male fertilizing all the eggs of these things. That's how they were multiplying so fast, because he suggests that the males are just flying over the eggs and fertilizing them. This spooks Quinn, as he knows where the male is. Quinn tells him no, that he won't lend him any people, and Zan reminds him, you're a giant nerd, and our home is already gone, basically. Alex asks why he's putting his tail between his legs, which then it comes out Quinn actually knows exactly where to go. Zan now goes outside and tries to rally Quinn's people, telling them that they're just made of organs. You can destroy organs, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. 4 people volunteer, and now the voluntold section of the campaign begins. This makes Quinn upsetty as he begins to attack Zan, but this dude appears to be a little better at fighting. He basically whoops Quinn's tail before being pulled off of him as Alex warns Quinn that he's unfeeling. You see, Van Zan didn't get enough hugs as a kid and only wants to destroy wyverns. Quinn worries stem from the fact that a wyvern could come back to their home, which this is actually completely founded. These things are relatively smart, but they still are animals. So as Quinn goes to clean and dress his wounds, his semi-son comes down and says that he joined up with Zan and that Quinn isn't his real dad. You can't stop me, Pops. I was made for fighting wyverns. It's not a phase. Turns out to be a mega phase. So Quinn is like, yeah, you know what? Actually, see ya. Which sends old Jer Bear on his way walking. But because he didn't get a response he wanted, he decided to stay while the Americans head to London to take down the bull wyvern. Later on, Jer Bear meets up with Quinn in the burnt farmyard. And see, look, I told you, he decided to come back. And then he apologizes to Quinn. Later that night, as Quinn goes back to the dragon carcass, he finds an egg with an incubating dragon. So you can actually say this 2 ways, but they are ovoviviparous or ovoviviparous. Doesn't really matter. But that just means that they produce eggs inside of their body and it develops until they're ready to hatch, which then they hatch. So heading to London, well, it's pretty much destroyed. Melted cars, human skeletons, the works. Well, remember, these are townspeople from Kansas, so they do the smart thing and line up in a line formation, tightly packed, with a creature that flies overhead and sprays down fire in straight lines. You see where this is going. Alex overhead says that the whole thing is blocked for miles. She flies off to find a way to get across while they see fire. Then they hear the bull flying overhead and really all around. It then begins its attack as Zan gets blasted back and under a tank. The bull then ignites the whole line as Alex calls back to Zan, but nobody is answering. She gets back to the line and discovers that everything is completely melted and Zan is the sole survivor. Everyone was basically turned to ash and now they head back to the castle. Well, old Mr. Grumpy Wyvern is headed there as well. He begins burning the castle as Quinn then rides back. They get most of the kids and people downstairs in the water dispensed area, but a lot of people are just straight turned to ash. This also suggests the bull knew that they were out there but never went out there himself, which is kind of interesting. Quinn goes on and grabs a few more kids heading downstairs to the safe area as the place continues to burn. Leonidas then tells Quinn that he'll go back up to get the people as the wyvern then sends a bolt of flames burning him and shutting everyone in the basement. So they say their prayers as time passes, which gives Alex and Zan and a few others a chance to get them out. Zan tells Quinn he was right about the bull. So now Quinn has the motivation to actually go and take this thing out. He puts on his big boy pants and says they're gonna take a chopper to fly along the coast and then use the tunnels in London to get close to the bull. And I'm curious where they are getting all this fuel for the chopper. As they land in London, they realize how many female wyverns there are, like hundreds. Then they all take off as a bull shows up and grabs a female to eat. They are starving and now have begun to eat one another. Zan tells Quinn, you lead, we follow, coming full circle as they make their way into the tunnels and are spotted by a wyvern. As they move into the tunnel, they light the way, making as much noise as humanly possible and discuss what they have. Concussive arrowheads that can take out the bull, but he has to expose his chest first to properly work. Quinn has a PTSD moment with the cage that his mom was in, and they ascend to the surface to confront the bull in a boss battle arena. Zan tells them the plan. Alex is bait, he's gonna climb up and hit the bull with the arrowhead, and Quinn is going to stay on the ground in case he misses. So now the man of the hour arrives and they enact the plan that is sure to work and leave all of them with a massive lifespan. As he attacks, Quinn then drops his arrows like a nerd immediately, nice job bro, and Zan climbs up the ladder getting to the rooftop. Alex now begins her run from the wyvern, getting its attention. It begins flying at her, and I don't really know why, but Quinn yells no at this point. I don't know if she knew she was supposed to be bait, but I'm pretty sure Zan told her she was basically bait. Anyways, it begins flying at her as Zan then takes the shot but blows up the arrow, which only injures it. Zan jumps at it with an axe. Not sure what the thought process was there, but then it eats him. Quinn goes and grabs Alex, who's limping to the barn currently, as the bull keeps attacking. Because it's injured, it's a little slower and apparently having some flying issues. Alex spots an arrow next to the truck as Quinn goes out to grab it. He can't get the crossbow pulled, which is hilarious, as Alex then runs by taking pot shots. Finally, he gets it as he waits for the bull to open up its mouth before hitting and detonating its glands in its throat to produce fire. This ends up taking out the bull, ending the threat of the wyverns, well, the reproduction of them anyways, because I'm pretty sure these things still do have a lifespan. 3 months later, there's been no attacks whatsoever. I don't get it, but they're putting up radio towers in the open to try to get people on the radio. The next enemy contacts them as they are speaking French, ensuring another fight is just around the corner because they are English. I mean, can you imagine? Your first contact is somebody speaking French. They walk into the distance as everything is super cool now, and there's no more wyverns, which still doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm not gonna lie to you. So to kick this thing off concerning some science, first we need to classify these animals as clearly they do fall into the realm of what appears to be native to our planet, if not incredibly old. Seeing as though they are ovoviviparous, this would mean they are similar in some respects to animals like sharks, rays, snakes, fishes, and insects. Judging by the fact that they do not appear to hail from the ocean, and also do not really have any insect characteristics, this would likely put them more in line with something related to snakes. Roughly about 150 million years ago, snakes actually used to have legs and would wander the earth on them. Then roughly about 128 million years ago, they became similar to the creatures that we know of today. You can probably see how I'm going to already relate this, but that doesn't matter because it gives me an excuse to talk about Titanoboa. If you don't know what this thing is, back in the day, I mean, everything seemed pretty bad. Animals were and still are in a constant struggle to outdo their predators, and subsequently those predators evolved to outdo their prey's defenses. The Titanoboa is an example of this. Today, the giant anaconda only reaches roughly 1/3 of the size Titanoboa used to be. Roughly 8 times the length of your average adult human, they could grow somewhere between 40 to 50 feet, being 3 feet across and weighing roughly 500 pounds. In non-freedom units, that comes out to a range of 12.1 meters to 15.2 meters, being 1 meter across and roughly 226 kilograms. Basically, it was a huge friggin' snake. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, take a look at the body of wyverns. They have those long tails and almost a wing-like protrusion on their sides that can flex and be manipulated to quickly turn from side to side. Their forelimbs have webbing between each finger, creating a massive wingspan, allowing the creature to fly quickly and proficiently through the air and turn on a dime as well. Their overall body, including their tails, is long and slender. In fact, without their limbs, they would almost be in like a complete straight line, much like that of a snake. However, I do not believe that they came from snakes, but rather maybe a distant cousin or potentially a progenitor of them. Because of the way they develop their eggs internally, this would mean a few things. First, the eggs are protected by not only the mother's body, but by the eggshell itself. Although I will say that the eggshell does appear very thin, much more like a membrane than anything. But second, this has several advantages to the wyvern species because the nutrition they need is within the egg itself, potentially meaning that even after the mother drops, the eggs might still be viable, allowing for the species to continue to thrive despite the mother being out of the game. This may be where the concept of taking one out but like 100 more take its place actually comes from, because they didn't destroy the eggs. They may still be able to hatch after the expiration of the mother. This, however, presents an issue. Ovoviviparous animals exist due to copulation, as we might come to know as the eggs are internal. This would mean that one-on-one interaction with the bull male is needed. However, by the rate that they spread, this would indicate that wyverns are oviparous. The issue is, when Quinn pulls an egg out of the mother, we see the wyvern is already forming in it. This means that if they are ovoviviparous, they would not be able to breed that fast, as it suggested that they just lay eggs and the male flies over it to fertilize those eggs. So this is a classic case of someone not knowing how birds and the bees work. That said, there is one other possibility. Potentially, due to the spread of wyverns, they may reproduce asexually, with the male providing genetic variability, potentially meaning that back in the day, there were a few males to millions, if not billions, of females. And if that ain't the dream, I don't know what is. Thank God my wife doesn't watch this channel. This also indicates they may be under the ground still, and we should definitely not go digging, as we might actually wake up more males causing the same issue. If this is the case, the male may choose to mate with some females and others just kind of leave alone or really just kind of not get around to it. This may be how the male eventually creates another male to take his place as he enters a stage of life where he gets older, and this may be due due to him possibly producing more sperm with Y chromosomes to create more males. This has to be one of the most unsustainable ways to propagate a species, at least concerning a complex species like a wyvern. Because let's be real here, insects do it all the time. But this would ultimately result in inbreeding on a massive scale and degradation of genetic stability. But really, if you think about it, this entire species is this way. They arise from the dirt after millions of years of slumber, just to burn and eat everything within a few years, then to just return back to the underground area and continue the process. Like, I'm all for securing your species' future, but this is hilariously destructive. No species would ever become this. Now I can hear you, oh, what about humans? Even we, to a degree, try to preserve our environment. Not to mention, the wyverns doing this, all they end up doing is making it more and more difficult to propagate with each cycle completed. I've just never seen a self-limiting species of this caliber before. So to round this back to my original point, because of the body shape, the ability to lay eggs, the potential of asexual reproduction, I would say this makes them a very old species, likely closely related to snakes, if not ancestors of them, with potentially some holdout adaptations that may have been present in the earliest forms of life on this planet, such as asexual reproduction, which would explain how they were able to take over the planet and usurp humanity so quickly, and why that was really lost in later species, such as modern snakes. However, it should be known that there is a form of asexual reproduction in copperheads, water snakes, cottonmouths, pit vipers, and some other species of boas. So it's not entirely lost, but the DNA would remain the exact same unless new DNA comes in. Which again, considering there is only one male, that means if he hooks up with a smoking hot mom wyvern, and then she has a kid sexually, but then that kid has a kid asexually, and then that kid has a kid asexually, and then he tries to go after like his great granddaughter, there's gonna be some conflict with the actual inbreeding process because his genes are basically gonna be very similar to the grandmother's genes. So yeah, definitely causing some problems. Likely this is the cycle that happens over the course of hundreds of millions of years, where some of the wyvern continue to evolve into other animals that may have actually been a less aggressive version in their environment. This allowed them to not need to go back underground to let life re-flourish, but they were still able to survive as life around them came back to the surface. They may have actually also been smaller as well, leading to animals that we see today. However, we aren't talking about those nerds who continue to evolve. We are talking about the ancient species, which amounts to what is basically planetary AIDS, wiping out the naturally occurring structures before completely depleting a planet and receding back to where it came from so it can destroy more in the future. This species is highly aggressive, like way too aggressive to actually exist in any capacity for several reasons, as it destroys its food source entirely and then somehow is able to sleep for tens of millions of years. Now, it's possible during times of scarcity that the metabolism could slow down to the point that it could hibernate for a while, but unless all chemical reactions stop to what amounts at room temperature under the ground, it's not like there was a severe drop in temperature that allowed their cells to virtually cease all functionality. This would mean we now have stumbled across plot hole number 2, the first one being how exactly do they reproduce, and this one being how exactly do they stay alive? Because there is no way. Metabolism is what ages us as cells get worn out, divide, and die. As a wyvern are stopping their metabolism entirely, then that means shortly after, they're just gonna be fossils, because at cave temperature, their bodies would still need to breathe, which means their metabolisms would still be running, which requires nutrition in the first place. Basically, this goes against how bodies work. A case could be made that they're like lobsters and functionally immortal by repairing their own genetic coding. However, they still need nutrition, because here's the whole point of mentioning temperature and nutrition in the first place. If they shut down their metabolisms entirely, what would start it back up? What is the catalyst that brings them back once more? Not to mention, we hear it breathing in the cave, meaning again, the metabolism is active and it is using energy in order to survive, which requires expenditure. Wyverns are not bottomless tanks of energy. This part just completely bugged the crap out of me. Now, a case could also be made considering that they eat ash. Maybe that's how they acquire their nutrition. Okay, well, let's go with that line of logic. Well, then couldn't they just eat the cave walls because they're down there anyways, and that appears to be how they're surviving? So that may be at least one way to bypass the metabolic issue. However, what would be the point of burning the surface then if you could just eat the minerals from rocks and survive for millions of years on that? But complaining aside, let's get to their internal anatomy for a moment and talk about how humanity would just absolutely smack down this species, because humanity is always number one, baby. The internal anatomy of the wyvern is pretty interesting to say the least. We know for a fact that this creature is mixing two chemicals to create fire, so the question is, how is it doing this? Well, actually more easily than you might imagine, and we see evidence for this based on Quinn's interaction with the male wyvern in the cave system. He actually got incredibly lucky, as this thing is actually trying to ignite him, but failed as one of those glands seemed less capable after such a long hibernation. The mixture is what's known as a hypergolic propellant. Typically, this is something we use for rocket fuel. A hypergolic propellant is a mixture of a fuel source and an oxidizer, and when combined, it creates fire. The important part about a wyvern having access to this would be its ability to actually have this at room temperature, because remember, likely it is a reptile or early ancestor and may not have had the capability of regulating its body temperature internally, which this may also be why when they go to the surface and inadvertently cause an ice age, they have to retreat back to the underground cave systems or freeze. And also, I did just want to point out, it may sound weird for a reptile this large to actually be flying around, but I would have to divert your attention to Quetzalcoatlus, which was the largest species of flying creatures, and they were the ultimate in pterosaur evolution, which means they were reptiles. Basically, these things were like the size of giraffes and could actually fly, which if those things were around today, no, I'm good. But moving back to the hypergolic mixture, this fuel that is used is typically known as a hydrazine, and it is colorless and inorganic, being composed of 2 nitrogens and 4 hydrogens. It is highly flammable, and when mixed with an oxidizer, dinitrogen tetroxide, this creates an exothermic reaction observed with spacecraft or with wyverns. And this is what's actually allowing for their ability to throw fire up to 1200 degrees Celsius or roughly 2192 degrees Fahrenheit. We see one of these chemicals specifically used on Quinn when he's blasted in the face, which I am inclined to believe was the fuel source hydrazine. Considering it was colorless, and when you get hydrazine in your eyes, it can cause temporary blindness, but an incredible amount of irritation to the sclera, resulting in the redness that we see when he ran to his mother. Apparently though, it wasn't enough to cause blindness, but we do see the results of being hit with this directly. The mixture would also explain why the male didn't immediately concussively detonate into a fireball after the arrowhead went off. This apparently damaged the glands containing the hydrazine and oxidizer, but when the two met in the throat after the explosion as the glands were destroyed, this would ultimately cause the male to meet its end. And the last thing that I did want to throw in here real quick that kind of possibly links these actual wyverns to reptiles is not only the scales that they have, which is the biggest factor, but their vision that you see whenever they actually see a human or they're hunting. We only see it a few times, but there appears to be like color around their actual target. And that's because they are tetrachromats, which means they have 4 types of cones, whereas humans only have 3 types, which is red, green, and blue. But they appear to have a 4th one, which is more on the yellow side. So they can pick up a wider range of coloring than humans can. But finally, let's be real here. Humanity is absolutely winning this fight. We see on some levels that wyverns are intelligent, seeking revenge for the attack on London. This would indicate that the male was actively aware of human activity in the castle and decided that after taking out the Americans, it was time to go after the townsfolk. This connection is something that we can see with other predators such as humans, but also with something like tigers. There are stories of humans coming into a tiger's territory and being stalked for days by the creature. Highly intelligent and lethal, they are what's known as a man-eater and gives our species a run for its money when it's a one-on-one encounter. There is another story of a poacher, Vladimir Markov, wounding a tiger in the winter of 1997 and taking part of the tiger's kill. It then, even wounded, hunted him down using his scent and destroyed anything that smelled like the poacher. It ultimately would go on to wait at his front door for him to return home, where it would go on to tear this man apart. Basically, this intelligence and almost vengeful behavior is not just specific to humans and can be seen in other animals, but nobody would say a tiger is more intelligent than humans. The point is, however, humans changed the course of the evolutionary arms race between species when we decided to pick up a rock and throw it. We became unbelievably powerful by using our brains, which is why we virtually dominate every corner of this planet. Now, nature itself still messes with us, but I think it won't be long before we honestly master that as well, considering we have subdued all species of this planet. I mean, literally. That's why the whole save the whales thing and don't club baby seals goes on, because every species here is virtually at our mercy. And it's not just like an arrogance thing either with like the whole weather concept. We already created air conditioning because we don't like heat, and then we created homes because we didn't want to be in the weather. So we built microclimates to our liking. We are already changing this on small scale, and I just don't see it being that much longer before we do it on a macro scale. Now, what is a distance of time that's not considered very long? Well, you and I probably won't see it. Our grandkids probably won't see it, but I believe at some point humans are basically going to control the thermostat of Earth. And also, humanity owns the skies. The only thing that could possibly outdo us is if another more advanced species came along to blow us out of those skies with their own technology. The point is, technology does what nature can't. It can counter hypothetical threats, and not just active threats like nature has to. Because of this, wyverns being top dog back in the day, destroying dinosaurs and scorching the earth, may have worked then because the species at that time wouldn't be able to necessarily counter this brand new threat. Humans, on the other hand, can absolutely counter foreign threats. With the arsenal in the air and on the ground, our ability to communicate instantly across vast distances, and even loading people up with the ability to put a round down range that can punch through an insane amount of armor and tissue, the fact is, I don't care if there's 100 dragons for every 1 dragon downed. Eventually, a person would find the male, and it wouldn't take 2 years, probably not even a few months. Because using that big brainy brain our species is known for, someone would point out, you know, that big wyvern over there looks completely different from the other hundreds of wyverns that we have seen. I wonder if it's different for a reason, at which point that would be priority number one. I mean, think about flak rounds going up in the air and blasting wyverns with shrapnel in a heart, missiles hitting near the male, and it doesn't even have to be nuclear either. You can absolutely get a big enough boom and a shockwave you need to do the work. Humanity just cannot be outdone by a species who has the intelligence of a tiger, the ability to fly, and just spits fire. Our arsenals are too strong. Now, this is not to say people wouldn't get got, because that's absolutely possible, but the wyverns could be nothing more than a pest species for a while. Absolutely dangerous, but in bringing humanity to its knees and causing us to flee and scatter within 2 years, probably not. Because just like the Quiet Place, I don't care what kind of armor you have on your body, even if you stop the round, the energy continues and will cause a pocket of vacuum to open up behind the armor in the body, resulting in tissue damage. And I mean, we saw the male get injured with C4 arrows, and the other wyvern, they literally brought down and caused it to snap bone on impact with a harpoon. These things are 100% susceptible to high caliber fun. In conclusion, GG easy win wyverns. Because while dinosaurs may not have had a counter, we could have easily and hilariously taken out the dinosaurs with our tech level right now, and I don't care what Jurassic World 2 says about it. We live with predators near us all the time, which typically and rightfully they've learned to avoid humans. Because again, we might be stupid and we might attack ourselves a lot of the time, but it's kept us sharp.